Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, September 19th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
I find that being compelled to talk now and for days to come about the question of the employment status of Jimmy Kimmel seems to be an enervating prospect. And we're not really talking about Jimmy Kimmel, of course. We're talking about the question of the application of government power and free speech and the relation between corporations and the federal government and Donald Trump's view of his rights and powers and authorities as president. So I guess those are very big topics. But I do want to point out one thing before we go on, which is that according to what I've seen in the last day or so, Jimmy Kimmel was averaging in the advertiser demographic, that is 18 to 49, which is how television stations sell ads, is largely to this cohort, even though broadcast television is now increasingly something that mostly older and very much older people watch. But that is the coveted demographic, because according to advertisers, this is the time in life when people will switch brands, and advertising is about getting people to not to reinforce that you want to buy the brand you already have, but to switch to a new brand or try a new brand or something like that. That's really the purpose of it. And that he has in the coveted 18 to 49 demographic, 110,000 viewers a night on average. So that's about twice our daily audience. Just to give you a sense. And so in the world of podcasting, we of course don't have a gigantic audience. Obviously, there are podcasters who aren't necessarily 5 days a week, although some are, who have audiences in the multiples of 10, if not 20 or 30 of him. So let me ask you this question. Why is Jimmy Kimmel still on the air when ABC could go to Joe Rogan and pay Joe Rogan $50 million a year to bring his 190 million downloads a month audience from Spotify to ABC? So I'll tell you why. Because Joe Rogan is too controversial. He's too controversial, generate a lot of negative publicity. Stockholders might not like it, might have some complaints that go to the FCC that lead to fines, like Howard Stern used to earn as a broadcaster before he went to streaming, or whatever you want to call Spotify, apping.
But I don't see it making sense for Rogan either.
Okay,
or a Rogan.
I just want to use this as a thought experiment,
okay,
because wouldn't that seem to suggest to you that in the world in which Jimmy Kimmel travels, in the world of being an ABC host that makes $15 or $20 million a year, that obligation number one in the Hippocratic Oath of being Jimmy Kimmel, a broadcaster on a network with more than 200 affiliates, is to not be wildly offensive. Like, in other words, like, obviously ABC could generate a much larger audience with a more provocative host. And they don't, and they haven't for decades. They have steered away from, they never gave Howard Stern a late night show. No one ever gave Howard Stern a show. He was the most popular broadcaster in America because of other considerations.
But see, I think of Kimmel as more akin to one of those figures in an economic infrastructure who's a holdout of an older time while everyone else is moving along. So he's like the travel agent after the internet has allowed us to book our tickets directly. So he's become kind of a boutique figure, but he is actually being non-controversial for his boutique audience. So the rest of the world's booking their tickets online and booking adventure travel. That's Joe Rogan, extreme travel, and they're just going to go directly to the source themselves. And then you have this little bubble of people who want to be kind of shepherded along by a nice host who's going to reinforce their prior convictions, and maybe they'll get a few laughs and they'll see a few celebrities, and that's the old way of doing things. So it's interesting to see who's rushing to his defense on free speech grounds and who's rushing to his defense on he's a great comedian grounds, because I think that distinction might matter in terms of the people who understand where entertainment is headed.
I think that's a fantastic analogy. The sort of the last buggy whip salesman or whatever. The problem is that when I said he has an obligation to be uncontroversial, that's not to his boutique audience. That is, if he wants to generate a larger audience that would be larger than 100,000 people, maybe the thing to do is not to make a program that is inaccessible emotionally, in terms of its humor and everything, to half the country. Like, how about not doing that? How about making something that non-liberals will watch as well as liberals? Now, maybe right now, liberals can't possibly watch anything that non-liberals would watch. When Jimmy Fallon tried to make that show in 2016 and 2017, he spent a year getting attacked and treated as though he were a buffoon for not going after Trump. And then he shifted, and Colbert became more popular than he was, and he shifted ground and became more critical of Trump but that was a different time or a different moment or a very focused and concentrated moment. And if you're ABC, why are you going to keep him on the air after this point? I'm saying commercially. So I'm saying his obligation as a broadcaster, not to ABC, but sort of like to the act of doing this job well, is to create something that is of greatest appeal to the greatest number of people. It's broadcasting.
But this is where Trump has once again, and again, I will state for the record that I think what Brendan Carr and the FCC did was completely wrong, just wrong. That kind of job owning, and I'm a conservative, so I think it's wrong. I thought it was wrong when Biden did it too. And anyone who calls themselves a conservative who's trying to defend that is not truly a conservative, because a Democratic president with that power and using it in that way would also be called out by us. So I'm consistent on that. But this is why I think they should have let him have his response. Put him on air. And because all of the reports we have is that he was going to double down on the anti-MAGA stuff, the attacking Trump stuff. And that's where I think the audience just generally would have kicked him out. I mean, he does owe the broadcasting, because it's the affiliate pressure. If Trump had stayed out of it and the FCC had stayed out of it, that pressure was starting to build. And those affiliates were not going to run his show anymore because their audience didn't like him. And so if he was going to double down on his bubble, and because actually the world he operates in gives him nothing but kudos. Now he's become a free speech martyr. It's going to make it more difficult for ABC, which is only, I think, temporarily suspended him or indefinitely suspended him, to kill his show. So this whole thing
more
is an example.
In what respect? What is the cost to ABC at this point?
Well, they look like they've been kowtowing to Trump.
They
look weak, and they look well. And the thing is, like, they could have fired him, just as you say, because his ratings were terrible. Yeah. They could have just done that, and the affiliates don't like him. He made an obnoxious remark about Charlie Kirk's assassin. That's all enough to just have him fill out his contract, and off he goes.
Right. Well, the affiliates not liking him is
Yesterday, I wrote in the newsletter, I feel deprived of the opportunity of having seen that play out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
I mean, that would have been a great thing. But also, I just want to John's question. I just want to why wouldn't the show or any of these shows try to appeal to a broader audience? I'm serious when I say it would take someone involved in the creation of that show to understand what that would mean, what a broader audience would want to see, to understand that if you're not liberal or leftist, it doesn't necessarily mean you're crazy and evil. I don't think there's a sort of critical mass, to say the least, of people involved in the creation of television who would begin to wrap their heads around a sensibility that could appeal to non-liberals.
And there's another problem, which is the incentive structure, right, of comedy today has left very few people who would fit the bill that they would be looking for explicitly, which is not a Joe Rogan, but still somebody who could appeal across demographics. Like you're sort of trained in this business now to pick a side in a weird way. This is what happened with Dave Chappelle when he was, when he was shunted over to the right because he criticized trans people, right? And then from that day forward, Dave Chappelle was referred to as a right-wing comedian, even though anybody who knows his politics knows that he's not a right-winger. But it was, you were a right-winger if you made certain types of jokes. And so you were like brought up in this world to choose whether you're going to be a Stephen Colbert or a
let's make
Chappelle
it clear.
Style.
Let's make this clear. Kimmel is not a comedian. Kimmel is a talk show host. These are different jobs. He may go do stand-up sometimes. He's not a comedian anymore. And Stephen Colbert was never a comedian. Stephen Colbert was a sketch comedy actor who was then a fake news correspondent and a performer who then got played a character, a fictional character with his own name on a talk show in which he was playing Bill O'Reilly, and then got his own show. Kimmel,
they're not writers. They did not start out as writers. The ones who start out as writers are so much better at this job.
Right. But he is not a comedian. And these are not comedy shows. They're variety shows. They're late night shows where somebody does a monologue. Then they have on Matt Damon if they're lucky, or they have on, somebody they have some, young actress who was on a streaming show, and then they have a musical guest, and then they're done. It's a variety show. The reason I bring up Rogan is to say, if Kimmel gets to be if ABC has to defend if Jimmy Kimmel becomes a controversial figure that ABC has to defend against affiliates and make a stand for free speech, maybe they could have had somebody 10 times more popular in the role of controversial late night host than he.
Of course, especially because they took Jimmy Kimmel and they housebroke him.
Yeah.
He was controversial. They took a figure that would have been controversial in our day and age.
Yeah, he was on the Man Show,
and made him housebroken into this.
Right, but so the point that I'm trying to make is, ABC is in a fascinating spot because I think as they think this through, and why would they want to spend intellectual and political capital defending a relatively not unpopular, but sort of like an underperforming show? His contract was up in December or something like that. From what I hear, they thought until a couple of days ago he was largely a corporate asset. He would go to board meetings and people liked him. He hosted Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He could be a reliable host of the Oscars, though now Conan O'Brien ate his lunch and is going to host it for the second time, but he hosted it like 3 years in a row. And so he was a corporate asset in larger terms, so they would probably keep him on. So now he's not a corporate asset. The show doesn't do well. And for this, they have to go to war with not just Trump or the FCC, but for this, they have to go to war. Now, they don't have to go to war. Kimmel is making them go. Kimmel, by behaving the way he has behaved, sort of like this is what I'm saying, like he should have been knowingly inoffensive in the middle of an extraordinarily heated moment in American history, and he went the other way. And but so
that's
I think it's
point,
terrible what Brendan Carr did. But I think in the world of karma, what he did was, you know what? A guy just got assassinated in front of everybody. We all saw him die in a tweet, in a gunshot. We saw his head snap back and be murdered in front of our eyes. And 3 days later, he's making jokes, and we're like, it's not even a joke. I don't even know what it was. This kind of like snarky remark about how MAGA is trying to exploit this or something like that. How about at a moment of like delicacy, keeping your mouth shut?
Because he doesn't. This is Abe's point. I think it's not just that the people who create shows like his have never really encountered nor understand where the rest of us were when that happened to Charlie Kirk. It's that he himself is constantly rewarded in the environment he is in by saying exactly what he did say about MAGA and Charlie Kirk, and there's no way around that. And that's where I think things are shifting really rapidly, because suddenly, I mean, we had versions of this in Trump's first term. We had versions of this during the Biden administration, but this is happening quickly. And I think the folks who have been very comfortable in the positions they've been in, saying what they're saying, even mild snark about any half of the country's political views, aren't comfortable anymore. And I don't think they should be uncomfortable because the federal government is threatening them. That's the most important thing about this whole story. But I do think that they should attend to what people are pushing back on in terms of what they're saying about people like Charlie Kirk. That they need to listen to, because that's half the country.
Can I ask a question? Because I honestly don't know the answer. I watched Conan in college, and so my introduction to late night TV was, Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, and there was a masturbating bear, and everybody remembers all the Conan characters. What is the job? What is the role here that Kimmel is supposed to play, and what is the role that they're looking for now going forward? I don't have the frame of reference going all the way back through late night's history. What is the job right now?
Nobody knows, because it's as Sherry Redstone said yesterday, she was the owner of, Paramount and CBS until last week, or is making the deal she said, late night is not a viable business in broadcasting anymore. So, 50 years ago, Johnny Carson had 30 million viewers. Let's just think about that for a minute. Kimmel has 1 million viewers. 30 years ago, Johnny Carson, who was the most popular television broadcaster in history, had 30 million people watching him a night. So Kimmel has 1/30 of the audience that at the high water mark of broadcast late night television. And that, by the way, there was only Carson. Like, Carson was so big that every now and then CBS or ABC would throw up somebody against him to see if they could get a little, eat a little bit of his audience away. Dick Cavett did it for years, and other people. And it didn't work until Carson retired. And then, it was sort of like Leno versus Letterman, and this versus that, and blah, 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 books and all this. And then as that was happening, the audience atomized. And now if it's 11:30 at night, you can watch Jimmy Kimmel, or you can watch, the new Netflix show with Jason Bateman and Jude Law, or you can watch anything. So the question is, why would you watch Jimmy Kimmel? So Sherry Redstone, who ran a network, said this is no longer a viable business. That's why Colbert was fired. In this sense, you fire Colbert, or you let him go, because A, it's not a viable business, and B, and this is like, you don't need the tsaurus of Trump being mad at you. Now that we look at it and go, this is not America. We're not supposed to worry that the president is mad at you. But I mentioned this the other day. In 2009, when the partial nationalization of the automobile industry took place at Barack Obama's behest, and the debtors that these companies going into default had, some of them had lent them money late, and there's a thing called mezzanine funding, and you have the order of debtors, and this is common law. This is like literally why common law came into existence. And there were people who, if the companies went into profit, were going to get money back from, as the companies got into better shape. And Barack Obama said, no, we're going to pay the unions off first. And the debtors said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, we have contracts. Like, we were last in, first out. We get the first money. And Obama said, well, yeah, that's what your contract says. But do you really want to piss me off? You want me to go out there and go on a nationwide space and say, we saved the automobile industry, and now evil hedge funds are insisting on getting their taste? Is that what you want? You want to have that fight? I'll have that fight with you. And he had just gotten, whatever, he got 380 electoral votes and 54% of the vote and 60 senators, like all of that stuff where he was like uniquely powerful. And he did not hesitate to say he was going to use this power to sort of like work his will. So this is a bipartisan. Presidents have the power to go around and push private industry around. They'll use it. Like, it's not that often that they have it. Trump has it right now, not only because he's willing to say and do things that other people have not been willing to say or do, but because he has the Senate. So the Senate, if the Senate were in Democratic hands, Brendan Carr could be like literally today subpoenaed, put in front of the Senate Oversight Committee and had his lunch eaten or been
but
impeached
because
or
he
whatever.
has because he has the Congress and the White House, he also has the ability to do what a lot of conservatives have been arguing for a long time, which is get the FCC out of this business of monitoring content entirely, which is what a lot of us have wanted. It would just remove this problem for this administration and future administrations. No one has the courage to do that.
Obviously, he thinks it's an opportunity. I mean, that's the problem, is what do you do when you have a president who actually doesn't care about free speech or doesn't care about constitutional niceties and all that? And that is a problem. And I'm not here to say that it's not a problem, but I'm also not going to stand here and be told by people who are, going crazy about this, that ABC has some kind of moral obligation to defend Jimmy Kimmel, an underperforming performer who got them into trouble. He got ABC into trouble. ABC was just standing there minding its own business, and Jimmy Kimmel opens up his mouth and creates a crisis for ABC. I mean, I'm just, it's like they need to do it in order to defend free speech because they're a free speech, they produce content and all of that, and we should all defend free speech. Okay. But the emotional logic here is, if you're Bob Iger, it's like, I'm going to go to the mattresses for this. Is this what I want to spend my intellectual capital on Jimmy Kimmel's 110,000 viewers in the demographic? He's a jerk. He did something jerky. I wouldn't have done it. And now the affiliates are mad at me, and the president's mad at me, and the FCC is mad at me. I don't need this trouble. But if he doesn't do that, as you say, he's going to look weak. He's going to look like he kowtowed to the president. Well, maybe we're at a moment at which, as in 2009 with Obama, or as in 2021 with Democrats and Biden and COVID, where they didn't mind kowtowing to the president. I mean, people kowtowed to the president, and so Trump wants kowtowing, and Iger is it's not above kowtowing if he has to. I'm just describing real world conditions.
Well, they also he's they've been fighting. They spent a few years fighting with DeSantis and the broader conservative activist world not that long ago, and so it's possible that they're just tired of fighting, and B, remember Disney went through a CEO change, and they had realized that they had they were doing something wrong, even if they believed that morally they were right in whatever it was they were doing ideologically with the movies. They went through a management change because they realized that they were not handling the way they were fighting government well, and they are now changing the way they are approaching a fight with government, which is not that surprising.
I mean, here's the thing. Mark Halpern makes this point really well in his Next Up podcast, which you can hear today, which is, this is a watershed moment because conservatives are asserting a cultural power that they have never asserted before. What we've largely done over the last 30, as there's been complete parity, really, in the United States between left and right. So there's political parity, except at the high towers of culture, in which you have overwhelming liberal control at news organizations, at universities, in Hollywood, and all of that. And so alternate forms of communication have been sort of like incepted in a weird way. Podcasting is one of them. Fox News was one of them. These little Fox knockoffs were various other things, websites, all that. Like they've created, there's a conservative ecosystem apart from the liberal ecosystem. And every now and then it pops up and like says the liberal ecosystem, hi, we're here. You should pay attention to us. Like when Sound of Freedom, canceled, by the way, by Disney, not released by Disney and sold off to this little thing, makes $200 million at the box office. So it's like, you could make more movies like Sound of Freedom and make a lot of money. $15 million turns you back $200 million. You don't do it. And we're in this ecosystem. And now it's like, you know what? I don't want this ecosystem. David Ellison is going to buy Paramount and turn CBS News and maybe CNN, if he buys Warner Brothers, right wing. Put Barry, or not liberal. Put Barry Weiss in charge there, and ABC is clearly, I think, in the end, gonna silence or end Kimmel's show. And Kimmel can go off and start a Substack and start a podcast and have something on YouTube, and all those people who watch him now will watch him there, and he'll be fine. And the question is, if Trump and the administration tastes this blood in the water, are they going to try to muscle other people in illegitimate and unjust ways?
And that's I would just draw one distinction with the picture, the accurate picture you just portrayed, and noting the irony that it'd be funny if someone like Kimmel ends up doing the thing that the upstart conservative people started doing in order to get more of the cultural capital. It's that there is also within, among our side, a lot of other fractious debates. There's populism and conservatism. So the conservative culture war, it has changed dramatically in Trump's second term. There's a war about populism and MAGA populism and conservatism. And those two are not the same thing. And I know I keep hammering this point on the podcast. I hope our listeners will indulge me. But there is a cultural component to each of those two. And we talked about it in terms of, how Tucker Carlson is now behaving. He came out of the conservative world and is now a fringe populist, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what to call him. And that battle will also have who wins that battle will have an impact on what that conservative cultural ecosystem is going to look like in the years to come.
So I think, Abe, so we don't like Kimmel. I really didn't like Colbert. Not, by the way, not just politics. I think those shows are good. They're not good shows. Fallon is actually a better show. It's sillier. So in some ways it's better. I don't really watch any of them. So the fight then is not aesthetic. I mean, it could be aesthetic. Like Bob Iger could say, I don't like Kimmel's show. I've never liked Kimmel's show. We've had him because they keep telling me that he's good, but I'd really rather get rid of him. Iger has he's got nowhere to hide. He's got to make a decision one way or another about whether the suspension ends. Sinclair and Nexstar, the two big affiliates, have said if he doesn't apologize, we're not putting him back on the air, which I think is effectively means that he will be canceled. Because that's like a third of ABC's affiliates. So his audience of 1 million people in the demographic will go down to, 110,000 people in the demographic will go down to 40, will go down to a lower level than our audience while he is on this show making $20 million a year being broadcast 4 nights a week.
I mean, the problem is that this whole constellation of liberal late night comic pundits have turned this spot, this hour at this job into a trap. What if you fill it again with yet another one of them? You're going to have the same problem. With some new, slightly, different version of someone who is there to provide therapy for liberals. You're going to end up with some version of the same problem. But on the other hand, this kind of gets to Seth's earlier point. I don't even, before I said that there's no one who's involved in making these shows who understands what would appeal to a broader audience? I'm not sure I do either, to be honest. It has a lot to do with how the country has changed. Carson could preside over this massive audience because there was more, and I'm not saying this in a kumbaya way, there just was more common ground, culturally, experientially, everything. We are so much more fragmented now, that I don't know how how you appeal to more than one, two adjacent lanes out there.
Yeah, but you that's the weird part of this, is that people in this world have made their peace in some sense or other with the shrinking audience, right? In other words, like Kimmel puts up numbers like that in any time in 20 years ago or earlier, and he's off the air Tuesday. Like, it's like, what? There's 110,000 people in the demographic. Go on the unemployment line for the rest of your life. Now that's a kind of mildly defensible number. Look, nobody watches late night. The combined late night audience of the three shows on the networks is 5 million people or something like that. Like, so, this is how it goes. And advertisers are still willing to pay for ads on it. And so, at least it kind of supports itself in some fashion, even though we heard that Colbert was losing, $40 million a year. Haven't heard that Kimmel loses money, but it seems likely that the show loses money if that's the size of the demographic. But as I say, he was thought of as a corporate asset, which obviously he will never be thought of again. So I don't think the demand for what to do with that slot is like, I need 5 million people to watch every night, or there's going to be hell to pay. They've already made their peace with this, with the smaller audience. But that double time, weirdly enough, obliges Kimmel or Colbert, whatever, at a deeply sensitive moment where things are. We're not talking about an ordinary week. For the first time, people under 40 in the United States saw somebody assassinated, and saw it in real time and live, and saw it again and again if they wanted to watch it. That is an unprecedented experience in our time. Nothing like this has ever happened before. And you know what you do when nothing like something ever happens before? You take a breath. You don't open a mouth in 5 seconds, because you don't understand the sensitivities yet. And particularly if it happens in the realm of your ideological opponents, you better take a breath, because you really don't understand them, and just do no harm until you can get your sea legs. And that's where I think Kimmel, they want to make him a free speech martyr. Congratulations and good luck to them. But if you're like a serious person looking at, like the obligations of a public figure, Kimmel failed by creating this controversy that he did not have to create. He has free speech, but I could right now say, something. I will now say something. No, I'm not going to say it, but I could say something that was like totally outrageous. The FCC has no control over us. We're not broadcast, but I could say something that would outrage even, our donors and our sponsors and all that, that I might believe in my darkest moments about stuff related to Gaza or whatever. But I know not to do it. I know that I'm not going to let my id out, because I have responsibilities as I speak.
Can I?
Yeah,
I just want to add something, because
yeah.
You said something really important, and I think our listeners should also realize that under the Biden administration, when Democrats controlled Congress, they actually did want to expand the FCC's reach to be able to police content on things like podcasts and on social media and all these other larger platforms, and cable news, which was the big one for them. And
Right.
that was not successful. However, this is actually why one of the concerns about how Trump's FCC is behaving should concern anyone who's worried about speech on the right as much as on the left, and free speech in general. is that if the FCC's reach does expand into these other fields, then we'll be much more cautious about the kind of conversations we have on this podcast or anyone has on cable news or anywhere on an internet platform. That is actually, for me, the real long-term danger of a lot of these efforts. Trump is scoring these as victories, and it suits his vanity to be able to talk about all the terrible people who say terrible things about him. But there is a principle at stake here in terms of how we have conversations, and that worries me a great deal going forward, because that used to be something that I had a lot of confidence that conservatives would never allow to happen if they had power, and I no longer have that confidence.
Well,
Right. And a good example of that is yesterday, Republican Senator Cynthia Loomis, who is from Wyoming, said, here's her quote: "Under normal times, in normal circumstances, I tend to think that the First Amendment should always be sort of the ultimate right, and that there should be almost no checks and balances on it. I don't feel that way anymore." So that's the point, right? That's there. You have a Republican senator saying, these are not normal times, and now we're back in the, are we always going to be governed by emergency powers? Now, we had it's emergency so we need the tariffs because it's an emergency. We need this because it's an emergency. Do we need, are we going to get a fight over the First Amendment because it's an emergency? All these things going from emergency to emergency, but it's bipartisan. You don't, whatever party is in power, when this stuff happens to someone on their side, this is their response.
Well, and we've had, with this country's history, we've had, during wartime, during World War II, we had a kind of government censorship board. The government actually did use its power to censor things that it thought might aid the enemy. But as soon as the conflict ended, the people in charge of that effort immediately disbanded it, because they knew that if you left even a tiny one or two people buried in a federal bureaucratic office doing that work, it would lead to trouble. And it's why when Biden tried to create that disinformation board, the American public was like, no, we don't want anything like that. And it wasn't the problem of just their branding of it and the hubris that suggested about what they thought of their power. It's that Americans don't want or like that. And for exactly the reason Seth said, is that this is a problem where you give that kind of power to a federal bureaucrat or a government agency, they will use it. And it is very difficult once it's created to remove it. That's why we always dismantle those efforts in times of real emergency, which this is not. This is not a time of emergency.
My concern here, you're describing, the conservative view of, philosophically conservative view of free speech and government power. Donald Trump is not a conservative.
Exactly.
He does not hold these views. And the post-conservative right is feeling its oats. And it is seeing how far it can go and what it can do. And this is a very raw power construction. They had the power. They used it to oppress us. They used it to oppress us, particularly in the last 4 years, deplatforming people, throwing them off social media, silencing Jay Bhattacharya and Scott Atlas and people like that, whose unorthodox views of COVID turned out to be truer to the actual data than Fauci and everybody else in the public health bureaucracies. They wouldn't let us go to church. They wouldn't let us go to the beach. They wouldn't let our kids go to school. And now the shoe is on the other foot. And this has been 50 years. They mock us. They make sitcoms about how we're terrible. They make programs. They do all this. And now we have the power, and we are going to exercise the power. It is not how we feel these things should go. Why can I support what Trump has done with the universities and the efforts that he's taken against the universities, which we're told is a threat to free speech? Because the universities broke the law. They broke the law in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, its Title VI, which obliged universities to protect the rights of defined minority groups, among whom are Jews. And they broke the law, and they deserve to have the book thrown at them and to be punished for breaking the law and to have sanctions issued, including fines and including the withholding of federal grants because the law was broken. But if Trump had just gone after the university, much as I would have loved it, if he'd gone, given speeches about how evil the universities are in this way or that way and the other way, if that had not been the case, it would have been indefensible because universities are private institutions and they're private actors and they have enormous power and it's terrible and I hate them and all of that. But they are private institutions and he doesn't have the right to harass and torment them. He does have the right and the obligation under his oath to enforce the law.
Obama did it, though, by the way. I mean,
yes.
He harassed.
Also,
they were happy to comply, but he harassed in a sense with the Dear Colleague letters on the Star Chambers. He harassed universities.
But that's saying
that did not break the law.
No, but this is like saying, here, I'm going to harass you. I'm going to give you a big, giant mallet with which you can harass students on your campus that you don't like.
Right.
And they're not like, no, I don't want that mallet. Right. Those, sort of like
that's what Trump
those
did.
Star Chambers wanted Obama to do that.
Sure.
And that's, in a sense, that's what why Columbia was itching for a deal, because they knew in order to get their campus under control, somebody had to force them to institute some of these changes. It's just that the faculty hated it, and so the faculty rebelled. And with the Dear College letters under Obama, the faculty loved it. Everybody loved it.
Faculty loved it. The administration loved it. The only people who didn't love it were the people who had the 19-year-old kids who had their lives ruined by false accusations of sexual misconduct. And then it had to flip where they had to use, lawsuits to protect themselves because the federal government had literally joined the jackals.
And the first term Trump made the regulations, because Dear Colleague letter was just a suggestion, a bullying suggestion, but he changed the regulations so that couldn't happen anymore in his first term, which was a longer term process, but with longer term effects. Can I, something you just said, John, really struck me because of all the coverage I've been reading about the Kimmel stuff over the last few days. I've noticed that in the New York Times and a couple other places, when they're analyzing the broader threat to free speech, which is how they're framing all of this now, they keep bringing up something that is about law, and that's the declaration of Antifa as a terrorist organization. And I know you guys, the conversation you had with Andy the other day was excellent. It really helped me clarify how those distinctions are made. But I would say to a lot of people to watch very closely how that is going to be subsumed in the left-wing narrative about what's going on here in order to downplay what might in fact be organized violent activity on the left, and to try to sanitize that as a free speech issue. Because the fact that popped up, and it really struck me because I thought, I'm with Abe, like, yeah, if they're a terrorist organization, call them a terrorist organization, go after how they are organized, how they are funded, all of that. They're certainly violent and dangerous. And Joe Biden's attempt to constantly talk about it as an idea, not a thing, was ridiculous. But I would just caution people to be very skeptical if they see that brought into this orbit of free speech discussion, because that is not a peaceful assembly. When Antifa gets together, they're not super peaceful. So,
I mean, the thing about Antifa, they get together and they violate the law, and then you can prosecute them for breaking the law. The problem that happened on college campuses for 2 years was that people were breaking laws on an hourly basis on campus. They were interfering with people's right of free movement. They were, in some cases, there was a weird thing happened the other day also where somebody had a whole fit. Somebody spit on there was a Charlie Kirk memorial. Someone came up to somebody who was painting a rock or something, and then yelled at them and called them, evil, and then spit on them. And the person got arrested. And there was a whole thing about how you're not allowed to say that Charlie Kirk was that you can't criticize Charlie Kirk. It's like, you are not allowed to spit on another person. That is, I think in almost every body of common law, that is a misdemeanor. It's not assault, but you are not. It is illegal to spit on someone else knowingly, and
Should be a felony.
maybe it is a felony. I don't know what state we're in, but it's
disgusting.
close. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
disgusting, and you could transmit disease, whatever. But my point is, like,
so disgusting.
people are always calling things speech that aren't speech, and thereby trying to get out of the consequences of it. Like, Mahmoud Khalil has now been, a judge in Louisiana has said he is to be deported either to Algeria or Syria, the two places. It's not quite clear what he is a native of, or what passport he holds, or whose citizenship.
He has Algerian citizenship, but was born in Syria.
Right. Okay. But anyway. So these are the two under our law. You either deport someone to their country of origin, or to where they have legal status. Okay. And the finding is that he lied on his immigration documents because he did ask whether he had political associations,
which we speculated about at the time. Remember, that was our theory. That was our theory of the case.
That he did not say that he worked for UNRWA, and that he had worked for, and that he was organizing or involved in this organization QAD. And it's not that working for UNRWA is illegal, and it's not that starting QAD is illegal. But he was asked a question and he did not answer it, and that is because he did not want the government to know that he had worked for UNRWA or started this thing QAD, because he didn't want there to be any friction in his document, and so he lied on when he signed the bottom of the document, and that is a deportable offense. After a judge in New Jersey said you can't deport him because he's a threat to American foreign policy. So there was a reason that I mentioned this, and now I can't remember, where.
Well, he can't claim. I think it's that he can't claim speech because some speech is lying on a federal form.
Yeah, that's not,
and
speech.
That's illegal.
Yeah, you're not, when you sign
technically
the bottom of
that's something you said, but that's not speech.
Yeah, right. When you sign the bottom, now, can you lie? I mean, this is sort of an interesting question. It's like Jimmy Kimmel lied about it. Now, there's the whole thing that you can parse his sentence if you want to study it Talmudically and say he didn't actually say that MAGA knew that Tyler Robinson was MAGA, and then they're lying about it. But he basically said that, right? So, but do you make a free speech martyr out of somebody who tells a lie? It's sort of an interesting moral question.
Well, we make free. Look, Skokie, Illinois, the KKK marching down the street was a free, again, peaceful assembly. So often free speech avatars are terrible people. They just are. But that the principle remains. Even in fact, it's the most important to protect in those.
But
cases.
That's not the. So so there were 6 months of defending Mahmoud Khalil. He lied on his immigration form. His defenders are now saying this is a pretext. They were just, they're hunting for a reason to deport him, since this court found that, he couldn't be deported as a threat to American foreign policy, which was the doctrine that Marco Rubio had activated in announcing his deportation. That, by the way, is not a final finding, and the Khalil's lawyers have now asked that judge, whose name is slightly similar to mine, so it's like Podniaz or something like that, Parbiaz, I can't remember. Anyway, they're like importuning him to do something to intervene here, because there is apparently no right of appeal. Like this is it. Like, he's going, unless somehow this judge takes some extraordinary measure. It's not clear what right he would have to interfere with the finding that Khalil had misled the government on his immigration application, and that if he did, he did, and there's no question about it. And you can't just say, I don't want him to be deported because I'm a judge, though that's pretty close to what people do. But like, okay, is that the martyr you want? Like, in the end, it's like they're constantly defending criminal action, as long as the criminal action people on the left defend criminal action as long as the criminal action is in their favor. The right does this too, but it's been much more prevalent on the left in the last 2 years, way more prevalent. And so I in some sense, it's a defense, weirdly, of the, all right, we're just going to seize cultural power. Now that we have political power, we're going to try to use it to seize some cultural power, because they'll do anything on the other side. They'll do or they'll say anything, which is what, of course, they say about us, or they say about the right. The right will say, we just follow the rules, and it's so terrible because the right will do anything. So we better not follow the rules, right? That's sort of Chris Murphy, right? When Chris Murphy said the week before Charlie Kirk was killed, this is a war. We need to, what did he say? It said, use some really, we need to use all means, all by any means necessary. We need to stop this fascist takeover of the United States.
But this has been a real challenge for the Democrats for a while. Remember when Michelle Obama did her "When they go low, we go high," and like a year later, Eric Holder's like, "When they go low, we kick them." I mean, it was not like they've been struggling to find their, the deeply good soul there, and the same struggle happens on the right. I mean, I'm sorry, this tension has really lit up both sides of the aisle recently in a way that is harrowing when we think about the people who actually, again, all of the normies who just want to get the system working again in a way that actually moves stuff forward.
And this is, by the way, this is a point that Noam Bloom keeps making on Twitter. He makes a lot, which is this is what the definition of a slippery slope is.
Yeah.
Right. We keep having these arguments.
It's wonderful. I mentioned this yesterday, and Noam's my nephew. So I don't want to spend there's a limit to how much Noam Bloom content.
Right. I just mean what Christine is saying is
have enough Noam Bloom content.
One of the arguments that people make on both sides is this is worse than the last thing. And it's like, okay, and the next thing is going to be worse than this thing. And it's going to come from your side. And then after that, it's going to come from the other side. And it's going to be worse than that. The worse than that is not enough of an objection. Because worse than that does not mean it's a new thing that we've never seen before.
Okay, so I don't want to. I'm only doing this because it's an example ready to hand. I'm going to read a tweet that I wrote this morning, and then a response by Josh Gerstein, the legal affairs editor of Politico. And I wouldn't ordinarily read my own tweet on the air or something, but you'll see why. So here's what I wrote, and it echoes what I've been saying today. Here's the thing. Jimmy Kimmel can go out right now and make a video on Twitter mocking, criticizing, investigating our leaders. He can write a piece. He can stand on a soapbox in MacArthur Park. Nothing is stopping him. I did that in response to a quote by Jake Tapper, who said, if we do not have the ability to criticize, mock, investigate our leaders, then we are no longer the United States of America. Okay? So I said, we have the right. Jimmy Kimmel can go out right now and do whatever. Implicitly, what I was saying was he doesn't have the right to be on ABC doing it, but he has the right to do it. And Josh Gerstein, the legal affairs editor of Politico, responded to me as follows. What you are describing is Russia with, for now, a few less poisonings, arrests, and falling from high windows. So I said, Jimmy Kimmel has free speech rights. You can go criticize your leaders. I just criticized Trump, and Christine criticized Trump right here. We could criticize Trump from morning till night. Tens of millions of people criticize Trump on Twitter every day.
You can't do that in Russia.
Yeah. First of all, not only can't for now, but I mean, I am describing Russia because I'm saying Jimmy Kimmel can go and mock our leaders. No one in Russia. I mean, I guess legally, you can mock Putin.
This is the gift that Trump just gave the left, which was wallowing in sanctimony, and there was no reason to give them that gift. But he did it, and so now we have to be told.
But do you think that's
going to? By the way, that's the classic joke of the Cold War, is it not? The classic joke of the Cold War is, the American and the Russian, and the American saying, what I love about my country is that I can go out there every day and call Ronald Reagan a buffoon and say America is this and America is that. I can say whatever I want about them, and the Russian says I can do that too. I can call Ronald Reagan a buffoon every day of my life and twice on Sunday.
Yeah. But this is my question. You're saying that this is a gift that Trump... Is that a gift for Trump, or does Josh Gerstein sound deranged? Because I think Josh Gerstein sounds deranged. Now, maybe people... In other words, you have to bring to the rodeo the idea that Trump is creating an authoritarian system, or is like right before our eyes, and this is just more proof of it. Or I read Josh Gerstein, whom I don't think of as a particularly outre or like wild person in the media, and I'm like, you have taken leave of your senses. Like, we're not Russia. It's not Russia to say that Jimmy Kimmel's it is not Russia when the Wall Street Journal is attacking Trump and Carr for their what they deem to be his unconstitutional behavior. If this were Russia,
it's just like Russia where Putin was. It's just like Russia where Putin was put on trial his entire campaign, right? And charged with 39 federal offenses. That's what happened to Putin, right? And all his cronies went to jail and turned on him, and whatever. But it's also like, it's funny to describe that difference, because the Josh Gerstein's difference is a key difference, right? You're saying this is Russia, but without people being pushed out of windows and poisoned. And it's like, yeah. That is what I'm saying. You can criticize your government and you won't get pushed out of a window or poisoned. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Let me put it this way. I don't think that Trump is not a threat. How's that? I'm doing the double net. I don't think that you can look at we can do this the easy way or the hard way quote by Brendan Carr and say, that is not a very dangerous thing that has happened that needs to be cited. At the same time, and this is not whataboutism, I do not think that ABC has a moral or legal obligation to continue to employ Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, it certainly doesn't have a legal, unless the contract requires it somehow. And nor do I think they have a moral, because he said something that when Roseanne Barr made a racist tweet about Valerie Jarrett, and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama called Bob Iger to say that Roseanne Barr should be fired. He wasn't president then. They fired Roseanne Barr. I don't remember anybody complaining that Roseanne Barr's free speech was being suppressed among the people who are now saying that this is a terrible threat because it's a private corporation, can do what it wants. If it's only doing it to satisfy Brendan Carr, that's one thing. Maybe that is the case. It's possible that Nexstar and Sinclair are the pressure points, and that Nexstar has a merger and worried about the merger and all of that. Okay. I'm willing to entertain this as go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not sure that the problem is that if they're only doing it to satisfy Carr. I think the problem is that Carr made the threat, whether or not they responded. I mean, that in some sense that would have made the administration look worse had they made the threat and then the network kept Kimmel on the air. Would have been sort of worse, because now there is this ambiguity, like why they didn't need him anyway, and so who knows why what played into the decision to pull him to what extent.
Well, that's why, as you said, like the thing to do, which is actually what happened to Bill Maher in 2001, is Bill Maher said this thing about how we're the cowards after 9/11. And it was 6 months later that they either did not renew his contract or did whatever, and then brought this kid named Jimmy Kimmel out from Comedy Central to do this late night show instead of Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. But it did take 6 months. The other thing about Trump is that he gives none of us anywhere to hide, and he gives his enemies all this ammunition because he's like, this is great, and now you should fire Seth Meyers.
Yes, that too. Like, I'm sorry
Yeah.
for all the people defending him. Oh, that's just him blowing off steam on Truth Social. If Barack Obama or Joe Biden had put out that tweet against any right-wing cultural figure, we would also be very upset about that. That is not how a president should be using his platform, his megaphone, his power. It's wrong.
Well, I mean, Bill Clinton did accuse Rush Limbaugh of causing the Oklahoma City bombing,
and that was also wrong. Like, this
Yeah.
is why this is a misuse. It's a hyperbole. It's fan service for each side's base. It does not elevate the discourse in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm an old fogey saying these things. So
No,
Well,
you're right.
I have to say, like, before this happened, before the Kimmel issue, if Trump were to say in an interview, what he said, I think yesterday, all they do is criticize me day and night. I mean, maybe their licenses should be pulled for this. Maybe they should. Why should they be on the air if all they do is criticize Trump? If he had said that before Brendan Carr's threat, I would have laughed and said, "Oh, that's just the way he is." This puts me, this changes actually my sort of perception of that.
Right.
Obviously, for the worse.
Right.
And it's possible that Brendan Carr may have. It's possible that this was a huge misstep in a practical sense too for them, which is that there was evidence that the affiliates were tired of Kimmel on their own they didn't need a push. And this literally might have happened exactly the same way without Carr's comments. We'll never know. But now, in the wake of Carr's comments, and this happening right after Carr's comments, everything is going to be viewed through that lens. When in fact, he may have sort of impeded a sort of normal marketplace action that was going to sweep away some of the detritus,
Which
that
would
had
have
been
been
left behind by past culture.
What is it that Hamlet's father says to Hamlet, right? When he says, "Murder most foul, you need to go kill Claudius who killed me." And then, Hamlet says, "Well, what about my mother?" And Hamlet's father's ghost says, "Leave her to heaven." In other words, like, you don't have to intervene everywhere. She'll get hers when she dies for her adultery and she didn't kill me, but she was a criminal. But yeah, Trump leaves nothing to heaven.
But the thing is, had it happened the same way or soon enough without Carr having intervened, that would have been a much larger victory, cultural victory for the right, for Trump, for So they robbed themselves of this potential, real, meaningful victory.
I just don't know that there's that much indication of what you're saying, Seth. I mean, I do think it's possible that after this and whatever else he would have said had there been no intervention over the course of the next couple of weeks with his contract renewal coming up in December, that might not have happened. But what we do know, and honesty obliges one to say, is that it was after Brendan Carr went on Benny Johnson's podcast and said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," that Disney convened an emergency meeting to say, what on earth are we going to do about this? And then apparently Sinclair and Nexstar said, what the hell are you going to do about this? And somebody contacted the Jimmy Kimmel camp and said he was going to go on the air tonight and double down on how MAGA was trying to suppress his speech. Rather than saying, I'll go and apologize, I probably should have done that last night. He was like, they're all evil. They're trying to get me. And it's like, okay, well, you're being a really good soldier here. Thanks a lot. 2 of our affiliate groups are rebelling and the president's people are coming after us. don't you have some guy like, we've been nice to you. You've been on our air for 23 years. We paid you a lot of money. Thanks for your help, Jimmy. You're suspended. So there's a dynamic, but it did start with cars. The thing that happened on Wednesday started with Carr appearing, according to every. It wasn't that on Tuesday, Nexstar had called Bob Iger and said, "What are you going to do about Jimmy Kimmel?" So,
right. No, absolutely.
yeah.
It was the understanding that Kimmel was going to double down. That was going to
We
bait
cannot allow him.
Sinclair.
Right. No, the simple thing,
Nexstar.
we can't allow him to go on the air because he's
Right.
going to make. I mean, that's one thing about the suspension. Like, they didn't fire him. It was like he's about to like create a nuclear. He's going nuclear. He's not going to do it. We're in the middle of a corporate crisis. Like, he's just going to have to stay on the bench because until we sort this out. But of course, everything moves now at 50,000 times speed. So there's no like, okay, he's not going to go on tonight. We're going to have some meeting. We'll see what we can get him to do. But like, as these things, like move in real time, Sinclair's like, we're only going to let him on the air if he makes a multi-million-dollar donation to Turning Point USA. That's where we're going. Like, that could have taken, that's not, I'm not sure that that's where they would have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago without the accelerant of social media in the same way. There would have been more of a kind of like a slow roll of the scandal, but the scandal is now instantaneous.
He could have done what Jimmy Fallon just did and bring Greg Gutfeld on as a guest.
Yeah. Well,
that might have been what they were, something more along the lines of what they were expecting.
Well, this is
a
Russia.
concessionary
If you do that, it's
Russia.
You bring on Greg Gutfeld. That's like bringing on Goebbels. I mean, it's like how we're in Nazi Germany and Russia. I mean, that is the mindset of the people when we started. Christine said ABC is going to look bad, and yeah, it's going to look really bad to certain people. And it is, but I don't know that it's going to look bad to the people that right now matter. And that's what is the thing that Mark Halperin says on his podcast is the revolution. That is all ABC would have had to care about before was how it was going to look in the creative community and what they were going to do and what Hollywood was how they were going to look and what was going to happen there. And now they have a whole different set of calculations with the aggressiveness of this administration and the accelerant that is the assassination of Charlie Kirk in the idea that liberals want to kill conservatives and we have to fight back. Christine, I think you have a recommendation.
I do. And I have it's another nonfiction recommendation, but because I was chastised by a friend the other day via text that I have not recommended any weird fiction lately, I'll be a little bit, if you'll indulge me, I did have a train ride the other day and I grabbed a book off the shelf on my way to the train station and reread Raymond Carver's collection of short stories, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, which it's just as whiskey soaked and bleak and awesome as when I first read them a long time ago. So if you're looking for a little not fiction, reread Raymond Carver, read him for the first time. He's amazing. Don't read him if you're worried that your spouse might be cheating on you, because this is not going to be a reassuring set of short stories. But the nonfiction book I want to recommend is called Breakneck, China's Quest to Engineer the Future by Dan Wang. As our listeners know, I am not a foreign policy expert, and so I'm always looking for books that will help teach me more about what I know I don't know. And when it comes to China, this book really taught me a great deal. Almost done with it. Dan Wang is a Canadian, but he spent a lot of time in China and a lot of time in the United States. And what this book does brilliantly is kind of give a thoughtful, witty comparison of our two societies. And one of the things I took away most from it was this idea that Americans need to start thinking again about process knowledge, how we learn to do things and why that's important in the making of tangible objects, whether that's factory-made goods or other goods, and how our attitude, he makes a contrast between an engineer's mindset in China and the lawyer's mindset in the United States. And there's just a whole lot of stuff there. And the great thing about this book is that it's beautifully written. It's just a really well written story. So I would highly recommend for anyone who's interested in the future of the relationship between the United States and China to read Breakneck by Dan Wang.
Fantastic. Just a quick programming note. Next week begins the High Holy Days on the Jewish calendar. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, begins Monday night, so we will not be podcasting next Tuesday or Wednesday, and then we will not be podcasting. This is now 13 days from now. We will not be podcasting. 2 weeks from yesterday, which is Yom Kippur. But we will have to find alternate means of morosity on Tuesday and Wednesday, as some of us attempt to bring in what I hope will be a sweeter New Year. So for Christine, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.